So it was started as actually a screenplay back in 2022, and then I spent then the rest of that year and pretty much all of 2023 kind of getting that in shape. So the book itself came out in March 26th of this year, and the simplicity of the story is that, I guess if you visualize a map, so think, look across the river, the simplicity of it is three main characters, three main locations. So there are plenty of other characters, plenty of other settings. But if you think of City Park, and we're kind of going around the side where you would have Harrison and Marconi, you familiar where I'm talking about? So go around as you're looking at the museum and all that, kind of go around more on that Canal Boulevard side, like you're going on that end toward Metairie. That's one of our spots. One of the other ones is go to the river bend, Leonidas. So Leonidas, basically about a half a block before first you have the train tracks and then that kind of steep little incline to the levee, not too far from where the Bachelor houses are at. And that's one of our spots. The third spot is go all the way across town, out on Shepherd Tour into the Vietnamese area, Versailles, generally people call, right before you hit Bayou Sauvage. And if you're taking that way, kind of the easy peasy way to get across the lake. Those are our three main spots with all that. And the fun with that for me was, okay, with that simplicity and the simplicity of three main characters, then within that, then I can go deep within them. And so each of them are very defined by their backgrounds, their history, this and that, and that was the fun of it. So the gist of the story is something that changed for me. I initially identified with a gentleman named Julius Mosley, who lives on Leonidas, because I guess in my mind also, same with Run Baby Run, the male protagonist was the guy that I kind of identified with. And it wasn't until several drafts into it, he's a martial arts teacher, had kind of a wild life when he was a young man, but he now family, very peaceful life, early retirement, teaches martial arts classes up in City Park. But what I came to find is that his prized student, who is exceptional, her story is kind of the enduring story with all this. And this will be the first book of a trilogy, and as this continues, it'll be more focused on her. And Maya Gaines is her name. So she's a young woman who has had had to react to things. So it's like the rug has been pulled out from underneath her, and she's had to continually respond to things with family, things with life, and she's finding through martial arts, this is giving her sort of a confidence, sense of discipline, and she's finding her way back again. Unfortunately, in doing so Maya works in the French Quarter restaurant job. She's biking home, comes across situations happening on the street. She uses her skills, newfound skills, to handle the situation. The book is not an action movie book, it's more a drama, New Orleans drama, with some action scenes in that for compare and contrast. And doing this and basically helping these people out, she's seen by a crime boss guy and realizes, I can have her do my dirty work, and then if something happens, she'll take the blame and all this, and then it doesn't have to be on me. And this is a gentleman who has kind of been running things in the Vietnamese area, but there is sort of a new upstart who's been kind of mocking him and wants to take over things. So those are our three main characters and our three main spots with all of that. What I wanted to do with this was have, as with all the books, is have a story that anyone born and raised will recognize it, and that it doesn't feel false. Secondly, for anyone who, like me, I moved here 2 years before Katrina, so anyone who's come here, anybody who visits, whether it's every year, every 5 years, first time, any of that, it also rings true. And then the third was people who are interested in New Orleans but have never been here and may never end up coming here. And that's kind of for me sort of the fine-tuned I guess trio that I try to hit with everything. So that means the simple things are, okay, for street names and one-ways and some of that, this is not going to be one of those things where somebody's going from, let's say, Leonidas, and then all of a sudden they're at the Pelican, or something like that. Or they're taking, I like the show, Your Honor, but they're not taking the bridge to go across to Metairie, stuff like that. So some of that is just, you know, basic accuracy, but part of it is the feel. Like at the same time, I didn't even think that I could write about New Orleans until I had been here about a decade. And even then, I only wrote on my little area of the Ninth Ward that I was familiar with. So it wasn't until essentially this book, now being over 2 decades here, that I felt comfortable enough that I could write about more of the city and get it right, just kind of the tone of things. And y'all know what I mean. If it's not there, it's obvious. If it's there, there's just a certain feel to it. Now, one of the things that you'll appreciate is that I found with the TV movie people is some of the things that we take for granted, call them synchronicities, call them happy accidents, call them 1 degree of separation, those things that happen often. What's great in real life, if you put that on the page, in a story, especially something for screen, it looks like you're taking shortcuts or you're kind of cheating the process. Because they want, well, this happens because of this, or somebody did this detective work, so they find out this clue. But as we all know, I mean, you could have something, if there's somebody that's, say, a detective trying to solve something, well, he may run into somebody else getting coffee, and that might be the neighbor of so-and-so, and they're talking about whatever, and then all of a sudden, oh, wait, that? And then it's the people connection, you know, that's how all that kind of works. So that's one of those things that I'm conscious of, again, that fine line, you know, for that whole thing. So so where did Last Shadow come about generally, and the title and some of that, what that means? I'm someone who loves, I do martial arts, and I love Kung Fu movies. Like anything, Bruce Lee, Enter the Dragon, 50th anniversary at Elmwood, I went twice last year. Anything like that, I love it. But I wanted to write essentially a story that had the elements of that in Eastern philosophy, but was for everyone. That was kind of the goal for this whole thing. The title essentially can mean whatever you want it to mean. It's the cover obviously has a silhouette, but it means in part the crime guy. So when this is sort of maybe the last shadow is in his last hurrah, unless he can really kind of hold his place in things. For someone like Maya Gaines, who is loosely depicted on the cover, this is a case of she's been in the shadows and now she's essentially stepping out to kind of spread her wings. And then for Julius Mosley himself, I don't want to go into the background, but there's enough about things with him of where he was and where he is now, and it kind of plays into that. Ultimately, for me, and not to go too deep, but especially if any of you are into Eastern religions, so Buddhism, Taoism, anything like that, was the concept of that when we are young and we're just doing the things that we enjoy to do, and life hasn't, you know, encumbered upon us that you have to do this and not this and all these things, that we cast a certain shadow, a pure, a true shadow of ourselves. And the idea that if you, as you are an adult, especially on in years, even more so at the end of your life, if you cast that same shadow at this point in your life, similar to this one, again, so meaning you, once life got in the way, you were able to get through all that. You know, life a lot of the times is not accumulation as in our own heads and our souls. It's not so much accumulation, it's actually getting that stuff out of the way to get back to ourselves, is how I view it. So if you can get to that point again for yourself, that's a true you as you're getting on in life, as you were as a kid, if that last shadow is the same as the early one, then to me, that's a life that's worth living. So that's kind of at the core, that's what that means when it comes down to it. So, but I'll read a little bit of this just to give you kind of a flavor for the book itself. Oh, actually, hold up. Just to give you kind of a sense of this. So for the cover, the artist did this, which I think was incredible. And I'm biased, but it's one of my favorite covers I've ever seen. If this was a movie poster, I would go see the movie. Didn't know a word about it. And where it came from was I didn't know, where we could begin with this as far as the cover. I just knew it needed to be New Orleans, but like the story be New Orleans in a different way. And I was thinking, well, we get a photographer, get a model, how do we even approach this? And then I just started searching hashtags, and randomly came across, you can see it, this photo. And I thought, oh my goodness, the balance, the power, the symmetry of that, I mean, I cannot do that. That's just too good. And I always go with the idea of the worst somebody can say is no, so I approach the photographer and the model and say, hey, I assume somebody's using this in rights, and they're like, no. And if you want to yours, and they made a very reasonable offer. We're like, okay, there we go. So after, this was last year, after a few months, then a great local artist who normally works in collage, but he does digital, we had to change a few things, but then he came up with this. So everything from the obvious, classic homes architecturally, but in red to make it a little different. You have the map. The angle should be correct, like so the quarter's not directly north, it kicked off a little bit northwest. The river actually literally runs through her. But all those fun things like the orbs kind of going across. This looks like, if you're familiar with Crescent Park, across the river in Bywater, this looks like this could have been shot. I mean, her foot's in water, but as it turns out, they're actually Oklahoma City based. So it was one of those fun kind of random things. But I wanted it to look very much like, something like it would be very kind of martial arts, Eastern philosophy, Eastern religion, but very New Orleans at the same time. So that's what he came up with, and I think he did an incredible job. He did probably so good of a job on that we just found out, I think 2 weeks ago, there's a new movie that went direct to video that we think they probably ripped off the poster, ripped off the cover. So that does show you're on the right track when Hollywood, considering that's been out on the internet since November, and all of a sudden all the different sort of elements of the book cover is in the poster. They were like, okay, so we can't sue them, but we can only take it as a compliment, because as long as you keep going to the well, they can't Xerox your whole well, right? So I'll read, and this will be initially from the preface, just to give you kind of a feel for it. A lone figure pedaled her bike up Esplanade. There were obvious charms. The narrow, grassy, neutral ground leading forward like an arrow. The oak trees as watchful sentries stretching to canopy the street. The native sun beaming through and bouncing off of a range of architecture. The cross streets with names like Durchenois, Crete, and Mystery. She wasn't feeling the allure though, not there to spectate or celebrate. Practicality took precedence, as in avoiding obstacles. Potholes like baby moon craters. Cars double parked or veering into the bike lane. Other bicyclists acting erratically. Still, she pedaled on. Her direction was lakeside. Directions of north, south, east, and west meant nothing on the streets of New Orleans. Not only because of the geographic northwestern tilt by much of the city, the human tilt too. Things were ordinary, different, and differently ordinary in the Crescent City. Soon enough, she would reach her destination. So you kind of see what we're talking about from that. So she's going basically from, she would be the 8th ward, so she's biking up Esplanade from that. So the first chapter. And each of the chapters, in addition to a number, has sort of an aphorism that goes with that. So chapter 1 is the ways and the form. Doesn't matter what your mind tells you. Your body can do more, said Julius Mosley. Call it heaven, call it hell. It's all just as well. Often it feels like too much of New Orleans is broken. Broken people, broken roads, too heavy loads. That's the hardest part about the city. When the party inevitably ends, the fortunate continue their haze and unreality in another place, a glitzier one. But others, the born and raised, sinned and saved, rocked and raged, are left with the broken. No Jacobin or Bloody Mary can fix it. Not when the ceiling has been sinking since birth. Getting so low you walk with a hunch. walls inching in two. That's the thing you can count on. The only old faithful in a temporary world. Keep your form right. Solid horse stance, Mosley encouraged. His students made sure feet were pointed forward, spine was straight, body was loose. And actually, I'll do a little demo. Do you know what horse stance is? I gotta show you? Okay. So horse stance, in martial arts, there's 3 stances. One of those, like if you see if somebody's fighting, this would be kind of angle is a blade stance. But the one that you really develop, even you don't have to weightlift, but you can really develop your quads and your lower body, is that basically you face feet forward, you try to have posture as good as you can, head straight, and then basically you sink down. So a lot of times you may see somebody holding a kettlebell. Sometimes they'll do where they're doing squats up and down with that. But essentially you hold that for a good amount of time, especially if you get to a point where you could put a glass and have something not fall over. You really build solid strength in there. So that's essentially, so if you picture right, and for those who don't know, when you're going up along City Park on that one side, Harrison and Marconi is this nice little stretch where you've got on the right when you make the turn into the park, there's kind of a little smattering of oaks. Not too far down from that on the left is where NOPD has their stables. And then a little further, it's not in the book, but a little further beyond that is Coterie or Coterie Forest, which you know what I'm talking about, which has the highest elevation point in the city. Does anybody know why it's the highest elevation point in the city? Because I love this story. Do you know? Amy, do you know? So, because you wonder, like, how can this one spot be essentially, depending on who you talk to, it's 30-something feet or 50-something feet. But how can you have that in this one spot when all the rest of even City Park is not like that, right? And this is a true story. So this was one of the Labords, I don't remember who this was running City Park when they were building 610, and said, you know what? You have all this debris, essentially the riprap from 610. Can we have that? And they're like, yeah. Well, then we don't have to, take this stuff to a dump. So essentially, they got all these straight pieces of concrete, and I mean, picture almost like a room this size, and that they just lopped these pieces, probably a bulldozer, and just threw all those pieces together, piled a bunch of dirt on that, and let time do its thing, between grass and everything else, put some steps in. That's where that elevation point came from. And I love that story. I love that story. That's how you get when you're probably 3 feet above sea level, otherwise, that's how you get to the top. And now out there, they have a beautiful map of the city. Like, I think it's either a relief or some kind of nice map. But that's how that came from. And that's a wonderful story. It's one of those only in New Orleans things. Yeah. To survive with any measure of balance, one must develop a code, a way of life worth living, or at least recognizing the law of cause and effect. Of course, this makes for an anomaly in a place where alcohol flows through veins and there's easier access to drugs and fresh fruit, where so many are unafraid to die but terrified to live, where everyone turns a blind eye to the reality that today's life of the party is tomorrow's discard. I like what I see. Root those feet into the ground, he added. Some make it through the wild days intact, focused, at peace, secure and unwavering in the knowledge that they are islands in a sea of constant reverie. Sifu Mosley was one of those people. Sifu would be, S-I-F-U is the Asian word for teacher, essentially, so that's what he does. He had a favorite spot for his class in an area of City Park, steps from Harrison and Marconi. Rain or shine, hot or cold. Oak trees at least 50 to 90 years old in that part of the park, which is newer for City Park. Weather was surprisingly pleasant on the 4th Sunday in August. Summer heat and humidity would be back, but it was one of the most beautiful days since April. They were relishing it. That's one of those things, if you're here, you know what I mean. If you get one of those days, much less weeks, in the middle of summer where you're like, oh my God, that's like you don't know when it's coming, but when it happens, yeah. For me, time of year is really key. So this, and there is a storm coming through. So think of something like Ida, not a direct hit, but something that's going to make a difference. That's kind of enough that's going to knock power out for a little while. That's key in this, but it's also key, as you know, different times of year. It's different. If it's so cold, if it's one of those winters where all of a sudden in January we're hitting like the 20s and you can't even smell anything, you can't hear. It doesn't feel right. So this being August is really key as much as on the page to have that. 8 martial arts students were squatting down, feet apart a bit more than shoulder length, thighs parallel to the ground, chins down, butts tucked in. Each held a light weight or a kettlebell. Mosley walked among the group, only one of them black like him. You wonder why we spent the past 6 months in deep horse stance. Seemed boring at the time. Your legs are like tree trunks now. Less is more, he called out. Sifu Mosley smacked both his thighs, checked his watch, and said, time. Now here's where it gets fun. Weights to the front, then return to your spot. The students ranged in age, but like most in this type of fitness, they either grew up liking to fight, were seeking personal growth, or wanted to be like the action stars in Kung Fu movies. Maybe all of the above. It mattered who the teacher was too. It was fitting that Sifu was the Chinese word for teacher. Mosley taught a unique style of his own making. It had 3 parts. 1, tiger claw style, or Fujiao Pai from the legendary 10 Tigers of Canton. A lot of the martial arts styles have basis in animal movement. So tiger claw simply means that you are, making the shape like a tiger claw would be, and you're doing things to strengthen your hands, your wrists. You're building up calluses. You're doing fingertip push-ups. You're doing all those kind of things. And then within that, there's certain steps that you do. 2, Cali or Eskrima from the Philippines, mainly for the footwork. So if you've ever seen anybody, sometimes one, but usually with 2 sticks, that they're doing any kind of moves, that's what that is. The interesting thing about that is this was a style that started in the Philippines, and then when the Spanish took over the island way back, especially because those guys that knew how to do the stick thing were able to fight back pretty well, they banned that martial arts because they didn't want the populace to be able to take them on. So what they did was took a style where if you think of your opponents in the middle, you're going at angles. So with Calis, you would have your sticks. You might think of a sort of a diamond shape, an open diamond. You might be coming at them here. You might come up here to sort of like the 9 o'clock position, but your opponent's always in the middle, and you're coming around them at different angles. So what did the Filipinos do? They basically just called it dance, and they worked this into actually dancing. The things that I love to do when I find out little facts like that, because of the Filipinos that actually ended up in St. Bernard Parish with Spanish names, and unbeknownst over all this time was that, oh wait, they were actually Filipinos, but you wouldn't know it by their name, and they sounded like anybody from old New Orleans at the same time. But one of the other things that I do in addition to creative writing is mostly music pieces for offbeat or cultural pieces for 64 parishes. And in the midst of that, everybody's got a great story, and I like to dig in deep because it's New Orleans history. It's personal history, New Orleans history. So I get to find out fun things that a lot of people don't know, or it's not out there really in print. Like someone, Wendell Brunies, you know the trumpet player Wendell Brunies? So he's currently, he had been one of the press hall band leaders, but now he is sort of the distinguished member of press hall right now. But a lot of people know that his father, John Brunies, was friends with Louis Armstrong, played with a lot of major people back in the day, and was very well respected, but they don't necessarily know his mother's side, which was Filipino. And his uncles actually played back in Storyville and were very notable, would have known like Jelly Roll Morton, you think of some of those early guys, but they came initially from St. Bernard, from a group of Filipinos who had initially come when they were brought on a ship with the Spanish. So things like that I love, and when I all those big things that end up being one sentence, that in my mind I wonder, wow, were they actually doing this, either the style or even the dance steps, were they doing this down, in